Okay, let's learn about sequencers. Over here, we've got the Sequence 3, Sec 3 sequencer from the fundamental modules. And this right here is the same kind of fat voice that we were working on before. I just moved the LFOs up here a little bit out of the way. And so what I'm doing here, this is going to be kind of our bassy voice, and then I've got two other voices, each with about the same amount of modules, right? So it's got a VCA, a quantizer, a wavetable VCO, an envelope, another VCA that the envelope is opening and closing, and then a filter, and then so voice 1, voice 2, voice 3 comes down into this mixer, 1, 2, 3. And then from that mixer, we're going out to the audio card. So maybe let's listen to it. Let's see what happens here first, and then we can learn about what the sequencer is doing. So I turned run off, so now I can turn it back on. So right now we're only hearing these two voices. So I'll turn this all the way down actually. Oh, I can do it actually. Let's turn it down here. Maybe easier. Okay, so now we're only hearing this, which is coming from over here. Nice little crisp. So we can kind of tell from the sound. So maybe let's look at the sculpting side of things before we worry about the sequencing. So the actual quality of the sound is coming from this VCO, which I have it as just a sine wave right now. Remember, with this WT, we can kind of play with this position thing here. And then it is going into, this VCA, which is being opened by this envelope, which has very quick attack, and sustain is down to 0, but it's got quite a long release. So that's kind of creates this, crystalline attack, but then a long kind of shimmering release. So if I did, right, so much more of just like a quick type of thing. The release really gives it that shimmery quality. Okay, and then that's going into a VCF. So really, when you're dealing with a sine wave, the filters don't do a whole lot, because a sine wave is typically, a very concentrated, pure tone. That's really, there's only a peak in one single frequency spot of whatever the frequency is. Cutoff really matters when we get into like a sawtooth wave like this, right? It's got the fundamental tone and then all the harmonics above it. So by opening that up, it becomes very bright or very dark. Increase the resonance or the drive. Okay, whatever. But let's keep it as a nice little glassy crystalline thing there. Okay, so that's how that's working. But how are the V-oct and the triggers running? So I've got two things coming from the sequencer. I've got the V-oct information, and I've got this gate. So let's look up at this thing. This looks crazy. I'm gonna, I'm gonna turn that off, and in order to understand, I can just plop down here somewhere, and let's just look at one of these by itself, maybe with the scope, so we can understand what's happening a little bit. Can I do that? All right, that's nice and big. Okay, so this looks like so many knobs and dials and things happening here. So this has 3 separate sequences. This first row, you can see here, this says CV1, and it's got 8 steps. CV2, also 8 steps. CV3, 8 steps. So, and the output, whatever the value of this knob is, right? That's 3.7349 volts or whatever. That'll come out as CV1 because that's row 1, right? And then trigger will hit. You can kind of see these the yellow dots here. So it's turned on right now. So it's progressing through these 8 steps, and we can see 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, right? So trigger will output a 0 to 10 pulse whenever we're on a step that is triggered. So we see this here, step 4 trigger, step 5 trigger. So what if we did something like this? So maybe first let's look at the triggers and we can worry about what the CV is doing. So I'm going to do, well, that's great. They're doing construction again below me, so hopefully you can hear that. Okay, great. You see that? So coming from the trigger, whenever the active step is on a place where I've turned the trigger on, we get a single sample pulse from 0 to 10 volts. And that could be useful for various reasons. And okay, so I took a little pause because there were terrible construction noises happening, but we're back. Where was I? I was talking about triggers, I think. So we can see because of these triggers turn on, right? It's giving our trigger output right here. Similarly, if we look at this clock output, so the sequence 3 has a built-in clock. We can kind of see this lighting up right here. So that's the kind of master metronome type of thing. If we did just showing from the clock here, regardless of whether these triggers are turned on or not, that just gives the regular clock beats. Also, we can change tempo, let's say. So by default, it's at 120 beats per minute. Make that a little faster. And we can see our clock, everything is running faster and slower, right? So that's kind of cool. We can put external clock, or we can put an external tempo even. So we could do something like, let's not just do it right now. Maybe I can put like an LFO, some sort of randomization, right? Like that could go into these. So we have a kind of variable tempo. So it's not a regular metronomic thing. That could be kind of cool. And then also steps. So by default, we're going to have all of our 8 steps active, but we could have fewer of those. So here we see like these are turned red now. So this is only looping through steps 1, 2, 3. So that's pretty cool. So if I trigger, let's say I just trigger this first one, so it's only going to output this trigger on the first step. Okay, very cool. And then while we're doing it, I guess let's see what this is doing. So steps. So this is actually going to output. Looks like it's outputting the voltage. So that's 0 volts for 1, right? 1 volt, 2 volts. So corresponding CV voltage comes out. Okay, so that's kind of cool depending on how many steps. That also just changes up some sort of CV that's coming out there. And then also we can do like on run, whenever it turns on or off, it just outputs a pulse from that. And for reset, if we hit reset, it'll output a pulse whenever we hit that. Okay, cool. So that's all of the outputs except for the CV one. So this is important though. So let's do whatever. I'm gonna just kind of randomly do something here, and let's drag this over here. Okay, tell it to run. Let's go ahead and just do 8 steps. Okay, so you can see I'm looking at row 1. So CV1 is grabbing this row 1 values. As we progress through, right, all these different voltage values come out right here. So by default, let's see, there's no range here, right? So the range we got is from 10 volts positive to negative 10 volts on the negative. So that's so if we're thinking about pitch values, that's a range of 20 octaves, which is an insanely wide range of frequencies. So typically what we'd want to do So I guess one of two things. We could, if you like, do you want to be meticulous or just kind of like wild and whatever? Let's do the meticulous one first. We could consult our table of frequencies here, of I should say notes and voltages and frequencies, and plan out a little tune. Where like Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? As E D C D E E E, something like that. So we kind of just type in these voltage values manually. Whatever, 0.670. Right, so visually it looks like they're all kind of in one little spot, but we were just right-clicking and really dialing in that frequency, or that voltage. I keep saying frequency, but I really should be talking about voltage. The cool thing about this is that you're able to get kind of a human little detuning quality. Like instead of, let's say 167, what if I did like 169 volts? So it's pretty much a D4, but it's a little bit higher. So just that little variation in perceived pitch matters. So that's one way. Let's say if you wanted to like program a sequencer to play a certain melody, right? Right click and you do it all by typing in the numbers. Admittedly, a more fun way to do it would be right click, just hit randomize. Look at that. And then automatically it randomizes everything actually. Tempo, steps, the triggers, the active ones. So maybe we go back. I'm just going to leave all these the way they are. And I'll just turn all these on. Just step 6. Yeah, sure. Whatever. Okay, so these look pretty low. So if I'm going to be sending this to a VOCT input on some VCO, let's say, I know that this is a insanely wide range of voltage. So what I will do is maybe VCA. So check it out now. So again, our VCA, it's not just for like a volume knob. It's also it's for boosting or attenuating any type of control voltage. And so here we're basically just making this range, decreasing it by 10% or down to 10% of its former range. And so now we get something that looks like it's fitting more into maybe like a 1 or 2 octave range right here. These are still totally random, so most likely they will not fall like directly on like what in the sort of Western musical theory considers like the chromatic scale of notes. It fit in between there. It might sound kind of dissonant, whatever. Try it out, see how it sounds, and kind of like tweak to your ear. That's always the ultimate judge, I guess. It would be your ear, or the super easy way, which maybe it's not as cool or intellectual, but it's definitely easy, is to hook up a quantizer and pick some notes. So let's say I want to do that. We'll do F sharp and G sharp, whatever. So there's some notes. So now this kind of randomness is being quantized by that. So now it's going to hit exactly those voltages that correspond to the notes. So that's what's happening with this. If we wanted to access these voltages from row 2, right? Now we're getting these voltages from row 2. So we could have, let's say 3 different voices. We could have something where maybe this row is controlling my V oct, and then I have, I don't know, let's say maybe some other VCA. What if I had this last row doing something like controlling the sound? What about that? Okay. So this last row is not being used as VOCT information. It's basically turning this on or off, or it's, I guess 0 would be 0. So let's make sure everything is above 0 at least. And we can get some variation. 10 volts would be all the way, and then anything between 0 and 10 would be gradations of that. Okay. So now look how that VCA is kind of going up and down. So that essentially is acting like a volume knob for our VCO, right? Or it's acting like some sort of an envelope that's opening it and closing it. So again, this voltage stuff, completely agnostic to what it's ultimately used for. It all just depends on where you plug it in. So what's happening then up here? Let's turn this back on. Actually, you know what? Before I do that. Okay. So now, as if all the construction sounds, it's still getting into the mic here, but I'll turn this sound just into the headphones, so it sounds better. Okay, turn this on. Okay, so we've got 2 rows. I up the tempo a little bit. So CV1 is going to this one, and I'm kind of attenuating this a little bit so it's not that super wide range. Quantizer, sine wave, quick little envelope. For the second one, and actually, and this envelope is being triggered by the main trigger. So all 8 of these are turned on. For the second one, so I got this second row, kind of similar thing, also going through VCA, quantizer, same situation. A little more of a gnarly, sawtoothy square thing. The envelope is a little bit wider, so the sustain is higher, release is a little bit higher. And its gate is determined not by every single step. But you can see I have this hooked into just this right here. Let's actually turn this on. There we go. So now we're hearing this voice. So when the step hits this, it triggers the envelope. And you can see we still hear the differences in pitch. So as the steps continue on from here, it doesn't automatically stop because our envelope, gets triggered and then it kind of slowly closes. So the further steps, whatever the VOCT signal of that is, it still comes through. If I wanted to, right? So if I get rid of the release, it's really, you only hear that one step. But it's kind of nice to hear. Beautiful. Okay. And then lastly, let's just listen to this first one. Okay, so what's happening there? We've got, so all this is the same as the last video, but controlling the VOCT into our VCO. I've got this other system. So I showed before on this 8 vert, I just typed in constant values. So this is a C, 417 is an F, and then 167, that's a D, and then 0.25, that is a D sharp or an E flat, depending on what world you want to live in. So these are all 4 of these plugged into this new module called a 4-to-1. This is a switch. So we've got 4 inputs, and then only one gets chosen to be the output. We can see this right now. So this one's outputting. Now this one is outputting. Every time it receives a clock input here, it selects a different input. So that's how I'm playing a C now the F, and then the D, and then the D sharp, right? And I have 4 steps selected here. If I only wanted 2, click that, and now it's going to only go through the first 2. or the first 3, 4. So that is playing through a kind of melodic phrase. And for this, I don't have an external gate on my envelope. I'm just doing this manually. Right? So let's put them all together. Let's make it a little bit faster, maybe. Oops. Oops. So I was changing this for that other voice, which step it gets triggered on. Okay, that's a little jam. And so I also hooked up, at least on this one, this octave module is also really great. It's very, very easily allows you to shift plus or minus an octave. So when I wrote these values in by hand, I just went with the easy kind of C4 to C5 range. And then if I want to shift it, I don't have to like rewrite these values in. I just do an octave and that kind of shifts it up and down as I wish.